Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to break down a pretty wild scenario, how a single domestic event, a mandatory summit in Virginia, could actually trigger a full-blown global security crisis. Let's get right into it.
All right, let's start with the immediate aftermath, because this is where things get chaotic fast. The world didn't just notice something was off. It felt a seismic shock.
And it all kicks off on this date. See, whatever happened just 24 hours earlier at a Marine Corps base in Quantico, Virginia, it definitely did not stay in Quantico. No, its shockwaves were already circling the globe.
That's how sources are describing what happened next. Within just hours, America's adversaries launched a series of coordinated military probes. And you have to understand, this wasn't random. They were exploiting a sudden, manufactured vulnerability, a weakness they tracked using nothing more than publicly available open-source intelligence.
And we're not talking about just one isolated threat here. The source material calls it a cascade of simultaneous challenges on multiple fronts. You've got probes in the skies over Europe, in the waters of the Pacific, and on the ground in Africa, all happening at the exact same time that tensions were starting to boil over back home.
So the big question is, how? How did all this happen? What was the event that lit this fuse? To really get it, we've got to rewind the clock just 24 hours and look at the summit itself.
Over 800. That's the number of U.S. generals and admirals. We're talking the military's entire top brass from 1 star all the way to 4 stars who were summoned from their posts worldwide. They were pulled from critical commands in over a dozen countries on just 7 days' notice, all ordered to show up in Quantico. A recall on this scale? It's completely unprecedented.
So, what could possibly be so important that you'd pull your entire military leadership out of the field? Well, this was no ordinary briefing. It was a complete, top-to-bottom ideological overhaul. The agenda was intense. Renaming the Department of Defense to the Department of War, rolling out massive reforms aimed at what was called woke decay, and, get this, conducting mass loyalty checks with threats of on-the-spot firings. This was basically a ritual designed to enforce loyalty and signal a radical shift.
Okay, so let's look at the first wave of consequences and see how this catalyst immediately started to fracture the nation from the inside. The stated goal was to make the military stronger, but the immediate effects, well, they suggest the exact opposite.
A new doctrine about fighting a war from within against political dissent was a direct assault on this constitutional firewall. The source material points to rhetoric that framed American cities as training grounds, basically normalizing the idea of using troops to quell riots. This erodes the fundamental principle that separates the military from domestic law enforcement, which is, a cornerstone of American democracy.
And all this had a very real, tangible impact on the force itself. As you can see from this chart, new divisive policies like banning trans service members and gutting diversity initiatives cost recruitment to just hemorrhage. Year-to-date, enlistment was already down a catastrophic 25%, and everyone knew these new directives were only going to make it worse. And this table just brilliantly illustrates the disconnect. For every single stated intention, there was an equal or even greater strategic risk. Take renaming to the War Department. It was meant to signal aggression, but it became what sources called a hollow roar that siphoned off over $1 billion from actual strategic needs. The loyalty checks, meant to align leadership, instead just created fear and quiet sabotage. Every move that was supposed to strengthen the U.S. actually created a new vulnerability.
So, while the nation was fracturing at home, the recall of all those top commanders created an immediate and incredibly dangerous power vacuum across the globe. Let's take a look at how this unfolded. For this many hours, we're talking 2 to 4 full days, critical military commands all over the planet were effectively leaderless. You had aircraft carriers adrift without admirals, and air wings vectorless without generals, all while their commanders were in transit flying to and from this mandatory meeting in Virginia. And this created a massive tear in what's called the Global Security Lattice. You can think of it as this invisible web of U.S. military presence, alliances, over 750 bases in more than 80 countries that basically underpins global stability. The Quantico summit didn't just poke a few holes in this web, it systematically weakened the entire structure, turning a stabilizing force into a source of major vulnerability.
And America's adversaries? They did not wait. As this timeline shows, they used that open-source intelligence to track the command gaps and launched simultaneous probes right inside that window of opportunity. China spiked its operations near Taiwan.
Russia started testing NATO air defenses. In the Middle East, Iranian proxies began probing thinned-out U.S. patrols, while in Africa, Russia's Wagner Group moved right in to fill the voids. It was a perfectly coordinated exploitation of a self-inflicted wound.
So, here's the crucial point. It's how these internal and external fractures combined. This wasn't just a domestic crisis or just a foreign policy crisis. It was a systemic collapse, creating a situation far greater and far more dangerous than the sum of its parts.
According to the sources, this single event marked a fundamental shift. It transformed the United States from being the main stabilizer of the post-World War II order, that era of Pax Americana, into a primary source of global instability, creating a dangerous and unpredictable new world.
And here's the key takeaway. A domestic loyalty ritual, really a political spectacle on a Marine Corps base, had become the hinge upon which the fate of the entire globe now turned. It tied nearly 300 global entities, from sovereign nations to dependent territories, together in a new, shared, and very precarious situation.
And that leaves us with a stark and really unsettling question. It just underscores the grim reality that in this new, fractured world, the lines between foreign threats and domestic crises have become dangerously and perhaps even irreversibly blurred.